get started. I hope I'm audible, I'm visible.
Yes. Yep.
So I'll just start with sharing my screen, and you can let me know if all looks good.
Yeah. We're good.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our series of sessions which we are following. Today topic is single node orchestrator installation that we will be covering. My name is Arun Kumar, and I'm a technical account manager working with the UiPath. With me, I have my colleague Priyesh Tiwari, who is also a technical account manager. While we move on with the session, as Vibhor already mentioned, we will be using Slido for posting your questions, and we will be answering them there only. There is also a link that you can make use of to go to the Slido and ask your questions. We will be pasting this link in the chat box as well, so don't worry. And you can use this link for your questions. Um, so after this, we will just start with the event in the series that we have. We have already had a session on UiPath platform deployment architecture 2 weeks back. And today we have single node orchestrator installation. These are our upcoming sessions in the series, so you can keep following for the upcoming sessions that we have. All right, so let's get started. This is going to be the agenda that we are following for today's session. We will be covering the orchestrator components, that different components we have in the orchestrator. Then we'll be covering the single node orchestrator architecture, where we'll be showing how the orchestrator is actually uh, communicates, and what are the underlying things that it works with. And we will be moving with single node orchestrator installation. The installation that we will be going with in this will be uh, the infrastructure as a service installation on on-prem, where we will be using a virtual machine hosted on Azure. Okay, and this I will be covering with the MSI as well as command line. So we are aware of both the installation that we have with us. After that, we will be moving to platform as a service architecture of Orchestrator, where again we will be using Azure for hosting our orchestrator and different services. And then we will be covering the PaaS installation, uh, and we will be showing different app services. And after that, we'll be having a short Q&A session. And if the time permits, we will also have a short quiz. All right, so that's about the agenda. I will start with the orchestrator components. As we can see in in our slide, that we have three components that immediately computes the orchestrator. We have orchestrator, identity, and webhook. Orchestrator lies in the heart, where it helps in the communication with different robots, different machines, and you can have your license management there. Uh, comes with it is the identity. Identity makes sure of the centralized authentication, and basically the access management for the orchestrator. We have webhooks also that helps in the communication with the external applications that you want to employ. Uh, this covers the components that we have the orchestrator. Now let's move on to the architecture that the orchestrator, that single node architecture follows. As you can see here that, just a second, sorry. Yeah, as you can see here that we have orchestrator that is lying on the heart of our architecture. Orchestrator on the back end works with the SQL server. It communicates with the SQL server, where we have the schema of the UI path stored. Uh, and the orchestrator helps in managing the licensing packages, as well as the communication with the robots. You can deploy lots of packages there, and uh, you can trigger the jobs. So this happens via orchestrator. All the calls are passed via orchestrator, and you have your attended and unattended robots running, and orchestrator is orchestrating that part. So this is about the simple architecture. We'll be seeing when we will be doing an installation, we'll be seeing how these different things come into picture. Now, I would like to move on to the the installation part. After this, during this slide, we do not have, we'd like to move on to the VM where we will be covering the installation part. And then we would return back to this slide again. So I would quickly shuffle to my virtual machine where we will be covering the hardware requirements, software requirements, and different prerequisites that we need for the installation. After that, like I mentioned, we will be covering a command line installation and the MSI based installation. All right, so let's move on to the VM. This is the VM that is hosted on the Azure, and we will be covering the hardware requirements first. You see, I have we are going with the documentation, and we'll be covering the different aspects of it when we are moving. The reason why I'm referring the documentation is it because we already have up-to-date documentation. So any information, if it keeps on changing on if it there is an update there, you should always refer the documentation that we have. All right. So let's start with the hardware requirements that we follow. In the hardware requirements, starting with the very basic architecture of the single node orchestrator installation, we require a web application server to host our website and the SQL server, as I mentioned, for the schema, the UiPath database schema. And this is the bare minimum requirements for the installation that we need: a web application server, a SQL server. For the web application server, we need at least 4 CPU cores, 4 GB RAM, and 150 GB hard disk. For the SQL Server, we need four, uh, 4 CPU cores, 8 GB RAM, and 300 GB HDD. Um, while we mention these requirements, it's good to note that these are the basic requirements, and it will be scaled up based on the number of robots that you are going to be running on the orchestrator. So as I move uh, down to the documentation, you can see that in, if we talk about the web application server, you can see that if we have 250 unattended robots, so as we are increasing the number of robots, our CPU cores are remaining same, the RAM is there, but our HDD is increasing, right? So as we are increasing the number of robots, our specs that we are presenting here may increase. Uh, for example, like in the SQL Server, again, as you are increasing the number of robots, we have a scaled up RAM that we are going to be requiring. Same goes for the HDD. So as per the configuration that you are going to be doing in your organization or in your environment, please make note of the different installation requirement. Uh, there are Elasticsearch server requirements as well, but we will not be covering that in this session. So that's about the hardware requirement that we need for today's session. For the rest of the updates, you can definitely check these docs. Now let's move on to the software requirements, right? So as far as the software are concerned, coming from the server OS, we need at least 2012 R2 Windows Server. That is the basic minimal requirement. Other than that, we also support 2016 and 2019 servers. Now, coming to the database part, we need at least 2012 standard or enterprise edition of the SQL Server. Uh, we also have 2014, 2016, and 17 and 19 standard edition, standard and enterprise edition. Sorry. Then moving on to the different other SQL Server that are also supported are the Azure SQL Database, Amazon, and Google Cloud SQL. So these are the specs for SQL Server and the web server. Now coming to the software parts that we would be requiring. Again, these are the advanced features that we can employ, but we will not be covering in this session. But as per your requirements, you can check this documentation. For the browsers, Internet Explorer is out of support. We support Google Chrome, Firefox, and Microsoft Edge. This is a web deploy. This is requirement for platform as a service installation. For the frameworks, we require, if we are installing the latest version of Orchestrator, so this is the documentation for that. We will be requiring the .NET framework of 4.7.2 plus and ASP.NET Core module of 3.1x or 6.0x. Coming to the web servers, the IIS that we will be running on should be at least 8 plus version. And the IIS modules for URL rewrite that we are going to be using should be 2.1 plus. There are different virtualization platforms that are supported, and these are the additional configurations that you can go through as per your requirement. But those things are the basic requirements. Now coming to the prerequisites for the installation, I would move on to, like we have already covered the required hardware and software. Now moving on to the firewall, since the orchestrator will be communicating with different components, it's really important that we have firewall configured in a way that the ports are open and there is no blockage in the communication. For example, 443 is a port that enables the communication between users and orchestrator, so that we will have to make sure that this is enabled. 1433 is for communication with the SQL Server. So these are the ports that we have to ensure are enabled as per our requirements. Now I will move on to server roles and features. Coming to the server roles that we have to enable on our server where we are going to host the orchestrator. These are the web server features for HTTP that we should have enabled. This is for security. This is for application deployment. And these are the other features that we require. So we can either enable these features via, we can enable them via the manually, or we can also use a script that we have that you can simply run, and it will automatically enable those roles and features for you. This is a PowerShell script that you can make use of. Now, this covers our the server roles and features. I would quickly move on to the SQL Server part. Okay, so this is the SQL Server that we are using for this session, and the authentication mode that we will be using, I will be explaining on that. Here, when we are going to be installing the orchestrator, we need to make sure what kind of authentication we are using. For example, in this session, I'm using a SQL Server authentication. So I need to make sure that I have the SQL Server authentication enabled under properties here. And so it should have a mixed mode communication authentication enabled in this. And since I'm using SQL Server authentication, I also have a user that that we will be using to while we are installing the orchestrator. Now, one thing to note here is that the user that we are going to have to run the installation should have proper roles in place, because it will be creating a database for us when we are running the installation. So the role, we should have a proper role under the server roles employed for it. For example, if I go here, I already have set the DB creator role. So it will ensure that the installation that I am performing is able to create a database in this particular server. All right. So this covers the SQL part. Now, the next important thing that we require is a certificate that should be trusted. Okay, for this session, we are using a self-signed certificate, but it's recommended to have a domain certificate that is in place. I have already created a certificate, and as you can see uh, in the certificate manager, I have the community SSE named certificate already present. So this I will be making use of while I'm performing the installation. So this covers the prerequisites and the software required. For the sake of this session, I have already installed all these softwares, and the features are also enabled so that we can quickly move on to the installation. All right. I will first start with the command line installation, and then we will be moving to the MSI based installation. Now for a command line installation, this helps us to do an installation via a script base so that we can pass on the parameters while we are performing the installation, so that we do not need to pass during the installation part. Okay, so you can already pass the parameters that you require. You can make it in a way that you do not, it can run in the backend as well. So this makes use of different parameters. First, let me show you the, the UiPath Orchestrator MSI that we have downloaded on our machine. And this we will be running. And this is placed under Orchestrator installer in the C drive. So this we will be running, and these are the different parameters that we will be using. For example, I will start with the first parameter that I'm using, add local orchestrator feature and the identity feature. So these are the by default mandatory features that we install. Identity comes shipped with the orchestrator, and so when we are adding, these are the mandatory features, and you can also add additional features, for example, automation or insight, but we will be covering these two only. The app pool identity type is we are using of app pool identity. This actually this is the type that the app pool will be using, the identity will be using to use the app pool. So here we are using the app pool identity. You can also give a custom account here, but we are using the app pool identity. This is the DB server name that I showed previously, and this is the DB database name. With this name, our installation, uh, the database will be created for the orchestrator. We will be seeing this after we have completed the installation. The DB authentication mode, I have mentioned we are using SQL. We can also use Windows authentication mode, but we will be using the SQL authentication mode in this installation. Since we are using a SQL authentication, we will be giving a username and a password for the installer to log in and create the database. This is the certificate subject that I showed you in the certificate manager, which is placed in the trusted store. This is the certificate subject. So these both remain the same. Now, moving on to the host admin password. This is the password that we will be using once the installation is complete to log into the host tenant of the orchestrator. And this is the default tenant admin password. This is again, I have kept same, but you can change it. So when the installation is complete, these two tenant by default will be created. Moving on to the next parameter, which is /q. /q is for a silent installation which makes the script run the installation in the backend. So you will not be interacting with any screen. Moving on to the last parameter, we have L star VX. This ensures that when the installation is being run in the backend, we also have some logs getting created so we can monitor how the installation is moving forward. Before I run this script, let me also show you the different parameters that we have in place that you can also refer in our documentation. For example, if you want to employ different parameters that you can make use of. We have a passive installation where you will, if we enable, if we use this parameter, then you will be seeing different screens while the installation goes on. /q we are making use of, and we are making use of this one. So you can go through these parameters if you have separate requirements that you want to enable, or basically if you want to use different conditions as well. So since we have a script ready and we have everything in place, I will quickly run this installation. So I can run this on PowerShell. Now in this, I'm already present in this directory, so I don't need to, I can simply run it. These are my parameters that I'm making use of. And I will simply click enter. And you see that nothing is happening. How do we know that everything is working? So we'll quickly move on to the location where my installer was placed. As you can see, the a log file has started getting created with the same time. So it means the installation is started and it's running in the backend. So we will check these logs in few minutes while the installation proceeds. This will take few minutes and it's running in the backend. So let's make good use of that time. Once we are back to this VM again, we will be checking the installation, how it has completed, and we will be logging into the orchestrator. So let's move on to a different VM that I have, where I will be showing you the installation via MSI. And we will be navigating through different screens, and we can understand different screens that we come across while the installation is going on. So again, the same kind of prerequisites are met on this machine as well. And we can simply kick off the installer here, and we will take care of the different parameters as we move forward. I have started the installer, and it's basically preparing, and it will also check in the backend, if all the requisites are through before it can move on. If they are not through, it will let us know straightforwardly here. And we need to make sure those prerequisites are met before installation proceeds. So my prerequisites are met. I'm good to go. I will simply accept the terms in license agreement, click on install. So you see here in the command line, there were different features I was talking about. We can enable those, but we are not enabling them right now, but you can enable these features as well. All right. So when we are configuring the orchestrator, there is a default website name with the name of UiPath Orchestrator that gets created under your IIS site settings. And this will be the name of it. There will be a default port that I was also talking about that UiPath Orchestrator will be using to communicate. This is the Ssl certificate that I mentioned that we will be using. Here, there is a name of the certificate, but it is recommended that we use the thumbprint while we are going with the installation. So let's do that. We have this certificate here. Let me show you how we can get the thumbprint of a certificate. You can double click on the certificate, go to details, scroll down, and here's a thumbprint. So I can simply paste the thumbprint here. It will ensure everything is set. I'll click on next. Now, this is where we mention the identity configuration app pool settings. Here we can let the website run under the application pool identity, the which will be the default one, or we can also give a custom account under which we want the identity configuration to run. So here I am just using application pool identity. It will be taking the default credentials which it has detected. I will click on next. Here we can mention the name of the SQL Server host that that will be used for installing the database of the uh, for the orchestrator. So let's get that. Sorry. All right, this is our server. As I mentioned previously, you can use the authentication mode as Windows integrated authentication or SQL Server authentication. If you use Windows integrated authentication, then the default credentials which are used to run the database will be used under this Windows name. And if I give a SQL Server authentication, I can simply pass on the credentials that I have created to authenticate to the SQL Server. So I will use the credential that I had created. And this will make sure that it communicates with the SQL Server. If there is a problem communicating to the SQL, then it will straightforwardly mention here and we will not be able to move forward. So we need to make sure that is in place. Now, these are the identity server settings that we have to configure. By default, it takes the same database configuration that we have for the orchestrator. Here it will be using the UiPath. But if you have larger deployments running, you can also make use of different identity server SQL settings as well. This is the orchestrator public URL that we will be using to navigate to the orchestrator, where we'll be checking the host and the tenants. Signing certificate, we will be using the same thumbprint that we used while we were configuring the previous screen. So I will think I closed it. So I will quickly get that thumbprint again here. Okay, click on next. So these are the settings for the identity server. So these will be using the same configuration settings that I mentioned for the UiPath orchestrator, and the database name will be under UiPath. It will be getting created, and I am using SQL Server authentication as I used for the previous screen. So these settings, we can click on next. These are the settings for Elasticsearch. We are currently not using Elasticsearch in our demo, but if you have Elasticsearch and you want to enable it, you can configure the same while you are doing the installation. So I'll simply click on next since I'm not performing it. Now, the next screen is where I can pass the host password and the default tenant password. As we saw in the command line also, we mentioned these credentials that we will be making use of when the website is, when the orchestrator is installed. So I will simply use default credentials. Just bear me 1 second. Okay, yeah, we are through. I'll simply click on next. So all the conditions we have already configured. So I can simply click on install. While it's getting installed, it will take few minutes. And we can move back to the installation that we have started in on the command line. So we'll let it run, and once it is done, it will complete the installation, and we can move on to the installation that we had run on the via command line. It's been few minutes, so we should be having the installation completed. Let's see. So as I mentioned, or through logs, you can check what had happened to the installation when you're running the command line installation. So let's see. All right. So yeah, here we see the error status was 0, and the log mentions that the installation was completed successfully. So we should have our orchestrator running, and how we can check what happened after the installation. Let We can simply go to the first step we will do is we will go to IS. As you see, there was no website previously when I had opened the IS. I'll simply refresh this, and we have a UiPath orchestrator hosted on the server. So since our orchestrator is completed, the installation is completed, we can go ahead and start using it. And for that, let's try to browse it. Uh, So once your installation is completed, you can quickly run some post-installation checks. You can go to the website and check if it's already created. The next step is to quickly check if we are able to open the link for the orchestrator. Let me see what happened to this one. All right, yeah, here we have. It was taking a few seconds because we were opening this for the first time on this. So as I mentioned during the installation, we have a host that that got created for during the installation, and these are the credentials that I'll be passing for the same. Okay, so we are able to log into our orchestrator via host credentials. You can go ahead and navigate through different screens and check different settings that you want to go through. We have a default tenant which is set as a part of the installation. So we can go ahead and check that as well. For that, I simply need to change my organization to default. Otherwise, it will log in me back to the host one. Credentials I had actually kept same. So I should be able to log into the orchestrator tenant of this particular. Yeah. So this is my default tenant that got created. Here you can have your robots configured. Yeah, you can manage the accesses. You can do a license management as well. And yeah, make use of it in any way you want. All right. So this covers the installation that we had for the MSI as well as the command line installation. And we have also made sure that all the post installation checks are done and we are able to log in. And I would also like to see actually, one thing that I missed is if I have a database created for this or not. I should have one. Yeah, as you can see, we also have a database created as a part of the installation. All right, so this covers the installation with infrastructure as a service of the orchestrator. Uh, Coming to the next part is something that my colleague Priyesh Tiwari will be covering, which will be the platform as a service installation of the orchestrator. So I will pass on the presentation to Priyesh to move forward with that. So Priyesh, you can go forward.
Thanks, Arun. Hello, everyone.
I'll just stop
So
sharing.
let me quickly share my screen, and then we will begin the second part of the session, where we'll be installing Orchestrator as a PaaS service. Hope my screen is visible to all. So if you can see here, we are talking about the architecture of the PaaS. You can see a similar kind of an architecture what we have for the single node on-prem Orchestrator architecture. However, the only or the major difference that we have over here is we are using the Azure cloud platform, and we are hosting all the different components of Orchestrator as app service. The SQL Server is still sitting behind this. Here we support Azure SQL Server as a backend. I'll quickly move on to the next slide. Okay. Yeah. Moving on to the steps that we are going to perform today. Eventually, the complete setup takes a good amount of time. So today we will be covering the basic installation steps and one of the components under Orchestrator service, which is Orchestrator. Few important things before we really go and start with the steps. First thing is like we need certificates, and that is something like a CA sign certificate issued by Azure. Like that is a mandate for this installation. Then there are 4 app services that needs to be created onto the Azure PaaS, like Orchestrator, Identity, Webhooks, and Resource Catalogs. Apart from that, we have to update few configuration details after the creation of the app services. We will cover those as well during our walkthrough onto the platform. The next thing is like we have to keep a database created already. So here we are using Azure SQL. So I have already created a database. I will be giving a quick snap of that during the demo. And then we have to update the connection string into the existing app service that we have created on step 2. Apart from that, for the authentication purpose, from the local machine on which we are doing the installation, we have to register an app into Azure AD, and then we have to generate client secrets. I will be covering those steps as well here today into the demo. And then the last part is downloading the installable file which is needed for this installation, and then running the scripts. With that, let me quickly move on to the installation part of it. So here we have our, I have logged into my Azure account over here. And if you see, the first thing I'll be doing is creating an app service. So I'll be going in inside the app services. It lists down all the app services which are being created onto this subscription. I'll be using the create option to start creating a new app service over here. I can choose the subscription. So if your organization has multiple subscriptions, you can choose what subscription is allowed under the policy to you. Apart from that, you have to have a resource group, like in which resource group this app service needs to be sitting in. You can create a new one if that is allowed. For me, I have just created my own resource group, so I'll be using that. The next thing is giving a name to the app service. So here I'll just simply say Priyesh hyphen community hyphen demo. So this will be my app service name. Now this is important. Why? Because this is the name of the like this will be the URL for you. So if you see Priyesh hyphen community hyphen demo.azure websites.net, it's going to be URL for my Orchestrator when my installation completes. The next thing is like you have to go through the runtime stack. So for Orchestrator, we need a runtime stack of .NET Core 3.1 LTS. The region in which you want this app service to be created. So I'm keeping it Central US. Again, that depends upon what is allowed within your organization. Then the Windows plan. Again, you can select as per your requirement what Windows plan you want to have for this app service. I'm keeping by default as ASP here. And that's it. I'll move on to the next part of it, the deployment. So if you want to have any kind of a Git integrations with this app service, you can enable here and provide the required details. For this demo, I'm just marking it as disabled and moving on to the next section. The next thing is the networking. So there's something which is related if you want to expose this app service to public or any other networks. At the moment, I'm just marking it as off. But if you have any kind of a virtual networks on which you have to expose this app service, you can simply select those over here. Next one is monitoring. For monitoring in the Azure cloud environment, we do have application insights. Now, you can enable it as per your need. For this demo purposes, I'm marking it as false, like we don't need it. But this is more of a monitoring that happens on top of your app service. The next thing is adding tags. The best practice whenever you're using cloud is to add tags so that anyone who is looking into different services or resources that you have created can refer like the owner for those resources. So I'm just marking my email over here. But again, it totally depends upon what are the policies and the rules you're following in your organization. I'll simply click create and review, and that gives me a summary of the app service that I have created. I can cross-validate all the details that are being provided. If I need to change something, I can simply change it. I'm good with the details, and I'll simply click create. And that will take a little while. Meanwhile, let's go and see what we have in the database. So what I have done over here, I have my Azure Pass SQL Server created, and I have created a dummy database internal, like not a dummy, empty database with UiPath CS demo. So only for this session, I have created a demo database. There are no tables at the moment. I'll be covering the details about this database in a bit. Meanwhile, let's go back to our Azure deployment. So just deploying. Let's give it a minute. Yeah, our resource is ready. So it is too fast to create an app service over here. As you can see, we can simply go on to the resources. There are a couple of things which are provided as a part of documentation as well. So let me quickly cover before we go on to this. So as we are doing the Azure app service installation, we will be doing the steps for Orchestrator. There are a couple of things that we need to ensure we are updating in the configuration tab under general settings for the app service once it has been created. So I'll quickly go on to the configuration over here. Just takes a little while for the first time, but after that it goes very fast. So here we are at the configuration tab. We will go to general settings. Here we are making the platform as 64-bit as per the documentation. There is one more thing which was an observation in the FTP state. The default settings are FTPS only, but in your organization, if there is a limitation on FTPS and you want FTP settings to be used for the file download part, then you can say all allowed over here, and that will allow you to use FTP as well as FTPS for the file download. Apart from that, we have to enable WebSockets on this app service. So I have enabled it, and once I'm done with the configuration, I can simply click on save. The next thing that we need to update here in this app service that we have created is the database connection string. So here in the docs, as you can see, we have given a sample out here. Like you have to give the server details, you have to give the database that you have created. The persistent security, we normally keep it as false. Then the user ID and password that is used for the database. Then multiple active results set as false. Encryption should be true. Connection timeout. And the important property that we have to pass over here is the trust server certificate. So we have to mark it as true. So for the time being, I have my database connection string ready with me with all these parameters and the new database that I've created. So I'll be taking this. I'll be going back into my app service. Now my previous changes are all saved. I will be going into the application settings this time. And in the application settings, as you can see, we have two sections. One is the application setting and one is the connection string. I'll be adding a new connection string over here. I'll be giving the name as default. Now this is again critical. That is how we have referred in the documentation as well. And then you can simply provide the connection string, which you have along with all the details that are being input into it. The type of database that I'm using over here is the SQL Azure. So I'll be selecting that. And then I can simply click OK, and it will just take a while to update it. Yeah, so it's there. You can just simply click on the hidden values and it will show what I've supplied over here. Once that is done, you can simply click save. And it just takes a while to update the connection string as well over here. The next step that we have over here is doing an app registration in Azure AD. That is needed to do the communication between your system from where you're doing the installation for the file upload and download part onto this app service. So let's quickly check that as well. Let me go back over here. So I already have a UiPath account over here. What I need to do next is I will be going in app registrations. And here I already have a couple of registrations which I can reuse. If I want to create a new registration, I can very well create it. For the demo, I have already created one. So I'll be going inside of this. And here, once you are here, you can see the various details like the application ID over here, the tenant ID. These things we will be using in a while. I will be covering that. But the important thing is like client credentials. So if you already have a client credentials which exist over here, you can very well reuse it. If you want to create a new one, you can simply click create a new client credential. You can give a name to it. And there is one more property which is recommended for how much time, how much month, like when it should expire. So you can either select 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. So depending upon what how long you want to use this app service, you can select it. If you want to refresh the credentials every 6 months, you can always do that as well. And you can simply say add, and it will add a new client credential for you over here, as you can see. And you can simply copy it and keep it handy with you. That is something which is needed in the next part of the installation. The next step comes, which is downloading the installable file. So what I have done for this demo purpose, there is a file that comes for the past installation. So you can simply download this file. You can extract this file into a particular location. And once you have extracted the files, this is how you will find different files over here. Like few of the files are script files and few of the files are the zip files. For this demo, we will be focusing mostly on the Orchestrator app service. So we'll be using the Orchestrator publish orchestrator.ps1 script. And along with that, we will be using this UiPath Orchestrator web.zip. But for you during as a part of installation, you have to just extract the files and keep it in this format. Next step here is like we have to use a publish script. So I'll just quickly give you a quick walkthrough of how the publish script looks like. And again, we'll be referring the docs for it. So here's a sample that we have provided for the publish script that needs to be used for doing the Orchestrator app service installation. So as you can see, this is the script. These are the different parameters we are passing. Let's cover each of the parameters in detail. So the action is something which we are deploying it. So the action is going to be deploy. If we are doing an update, then we will be giving the action as update. The package, so the package where we have the UiPath orchestrator.web.zip. So if I go back over here, you'll be finding this. So I have to give the complete path from here, including the web.zip file. Then we have to pass the Azure Subscription Id. So Azure Subscription Id is something which you can get from the app service that we have created. So for this demo, we have created this one. Once you go inside of this, you will find the subscription ID over here. You can simply copy the subscription ID and provide the details over here. Sorry. Then the account tenant ID is nothing but the Azure Active Directory. We have done the registration of an app into that. So you can simply go onto the app registrations. You can open the app that we have created. And you can get the application ID as well as the tenant ID from here. So you can simply copy these two details and you can provide those details over here. So this is the tenant ID and this is the application ID. The next thing is the account password. Now that's where the client's secret that we have created, right? We have to pass the value of that secret. So let's quickly check that again. So if I go here, the client secret, and I have to pass the value, I don't have to pass the ID. So I'll be using this value and we'll be passing it over here into the password field. Apart from that, you have to pass few other parameters, like most importantly, the resource group in which you have created the app service. So if you remember, I have created my app service into Priyesh_RG resource group. As you can see over here, the resource group is Priyesh_RG. So I will be passing something like that over here. And then the app service name. So the name that you have used while creating the app service, which is nothing but Priyesh-community-demo. So these are like, the mandatory parameters that you can see. There are a few other parameters which are like test automation. If you want to enable it, if you want to enable the update server feature, then you can use those parameters as well. The below parameters are needed for Elasticsearch. For this demo, we are not covering that part. So I'm keeping mostly the script till this point so that we cover all the basic parts for this installation. I have a sample ready for the same. I'll be using that. So to run the script, what you need to do, you need to go onto the particular path where you have the script file available. So let me quickly do that. And I'm into this path now. And the script is ready for me. I'll just simply copy this. I'll go onto my PowerShell. I'll simply place this and I'll start running it. What it does, first thing, it tries to make the connection with the Azure app service. So you can see the client credentials that we have provided over here. It has used that client credentials along with the different details like tenant ID and application ID. And it has logged into the Azure portal. And now it has started the installation. The installation might take a little while. So for the, we have only 5 minutes, and with respect to time constraint, I'll just show you one of the existing app service that we have here. Okay, before going into this, so at the moment, what we have done only the installation for Orchestrator app service. Similarly, you have to follow the UiPath documentation to do the installations for identity, webhook, and resource catalog service. Once that is done, you have followed everything. You can browse the Orchestrator service like the way I have shown you. So here in this example, if you can see, this was my app service name, and it has appended Azure websites.net at the end of this. And I can simply browse through this. I can provide my details over here, and I can simply log into it. And once logged in, you can have the similar kind of an orchestrator, which you normally get for the on-prem installation available, and you can very well use the features of it. With that, I think we have covered all the things that we plan to cover in these sessions. And if there are any questions, we are happy to cover them off. Thank you again, everyone, for joining and providing your useful time for this session.
Thank you, Prerequisites. Thank you, Arun. Guys, feel free to unmute and ask any question. I know some of the questions have already been answered on this slide, but still, if you think anything is not answered, please.
Hi, this
Hi,
enterprise version. So is there any trial version, or we need the license to actually use that one, the enterprise version?
So for the community version, you can try using cloud. But if you want to go for an enterprise version, then you have to get in touch with UiPath team to get an agreement in place and get the installable file along with the license key.
Okay, so there is no trial actually. Like let's say for 30 days trial or 60 days trial.
You
Not
can
like
do it
that.
on cloud. You can very well create an account on cloud, and you can use the services as a SaaS service on a community in the community way. Like for 30 days, I think we give a free account. But after that, if you want to do an on-prem installation, then you will be requiring an installable file along with the license key, which will require agreement in place.
Okay, actually the scenario is like here, like there are some clients, so they want to have the trial version of this on premises. Let's say we are doing one POC, so they will give everything, let's say that the server and other things, the database. But so if we want to have, implement this POC, so we don't have this chance, like we need the license for this enterprise version of Orchestrator. So in that case, actually what we can do as a partner of UiPath.
Humayun, I would suggest you get in touch with the sales team from UiPath.
Okay.
They would advise you appropriately on such situations.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Hey, hi Priyesh, hi Arun. I have a quick question, Nisar
Hi.
here. I mean, like I have two questions. First of all, how many robots can a single node orchestrator handle, max? And the second question is, following to that one only. So what do you think, in which scenario we should suggest client to go ahead with a single node orchestrator, and which scenario we should suggest client to go ahead with multi-node orchestrator? So what would we should prefer?
Okay, so as I was referring to the documentation, you can very well go through that. And a single node orchestrator installation, the number of robots totally depends on the configuration and the specs that you are using for your Windows server and for your SQL server. As we were seeing that as we were increasing the number of robots, our configurations were getting scaled up. So it totally depends on the specs that how many you can run. Now coming to the second question of yours, what should we suggest? A single node is suggested for POC and the development scenarios where we cannot basically lose our sessions. When it comes to multi-node, you have high availability, and there you can make use of if there is there you cannot afford a downtime, right? In those scenarios,
Right.
if there is a production environment, you should definitely go with a multi-node.
Got it. Thank you, Arun. That answers my question.
Sure.
Hi, this is Harish.
Hi, Harish.
Harish.
Yeah, so the same question I've put in the chat window. So if I'm using an existing database, okay, so which means I assume it's a migration. I am having an existing database. I want to point to that or make use of that. As per the documentation, UiPath Orchestrator won't allow us to use an existing database, right? Because it wants to create its schema again. So how to approach this situation?
So
yes, please.
okay, Arun,
Please go ahead.
you want to take? Okay. So just for better clarity, Harish over here, you want to do a migration using an existing setup and the database for it, right? Or are we planning an upgrade over here?
So we have I have installed UiPath Orchestrator already. Okay. So example, I've used it for POC, and we have some good progress, and we want to continue with the same database, but in a different platform altogether. So I'm using the database, the schema inside the database is the same. Say UiPath is the name of the database. I want to use it. But when you install the UiPath, it requires a fresh database because it wants to create its tables, its schema newly, correct? It won't allow an existing database to be used, right? So when you try to install, when you are giving the database details, it will ask, give a new database because the name UiPath is already taken or being used already, right? It's a schema conflict, basically.
So ideally, you already have an orchestrator, you already have a database sitting behind that orchestrator, and now you want to install another orchestrator using the same database, right?
Exactly.
So there are different ways you can achieve this. First thing which we normally recommend is to create a parallel environment. So you can install a fresh orchestrator which will create a fresh database for you. And then, there are certain steps that needs to be followed, which are a little complex, where you will be going and updating few values in the database. We don't recommend that, doing those things because it involves a lot of complexity. But that is one of the approaches where you change the connection string then for the new orchestrator and point it back to the existing database, and then you have to make certain changes in the database as well. So I wanted to, we can take it in detail as well, but it's more about if you already have an orchestrator and a database, you can keep on using the same environment.
But it
if you
won't
want
allow,
to-
right? Say, if you see, connection string is something that we do after the installation, right? But you are recommending like install using a fresh database and then go back and change the connection string, right?
Yeah.
Would it work? Because
so not only connection string is needed to be changed, there are certain values that needs to be changed at the database level also. Again, that's what I said. Like,
config files as well as in the there will be conflict again with the config files as well as the the tables inside the database, right?
Yes,
the client
that's
ID,
correct. That's
everything
correct.
would change, right?
That's correct. So there are certain tables in the database. There also you need to go and update the new details with respect to the orchestrator URL and the hostname that you're using for that orchestrator.
So my request is like, is there any documentation that you can help me with, or you might have worked with multiple clients, right? Do you have any document? If you can help me, that would be more than handy.
Let us look through that, Harish, and we will come back.
Thank you. That's it from me.
I think we are almost on time, a little over time. So if you have any other question, probably now feel free to join our next session and we can answer those queries. Thanks for your time. Thanks, Arun, Priyesh, Anand, and everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
for your time.
Thank you so much.
That is one again.
Thanks all.
Take care. Bye.